So, do you all hear me properly? All right. It's kind of hard to look at the text and look at this at the same time, but we'll make it work. So it's wonderful to be here, and thank you the organizers, Yamima and Professor Mendes-Flor, everybody else who is involved. I think this is very innovative conference, and it's a joy to be here. So my presentation discusses Buber's relevance to the main challenges of the 21st century, the ecological crisis and the technologization of life. Buber's dialogical philosophy is routinely invoked by environmental philosophers and by philosophers of technology. But if we recall that Buber died in the mid-1960s, just as the ecological crisis was fully recognized, and long before the emergence of the digital revolution and converging technologies, we can appreciate how prescient he truly was. Although Buber was neither an environmental philosopher nor a philosopher of technology, I argue that his dialogical philosophy articulated a meaningful framework within which we can reflect on and respond to the challenges of the 21st century. I will begin my brief comments on Buber's extension of I-thou relations to nature, about which we will hear more in the second presentation, right? By Claudia and her, whoever, I don't remember the other person's name. I will then explain how Buber inspired secular ecofeminists and feminist ethicists of care who highlighted the link between ecology and technology. And I will conclude by looking at two influential ecofeminist theologians, the Protestant theologian Sally McFaig and the Jewish theologian Judith Plaskow, whose eco-theologies were deeply indebted to Buber. In short, Buber was crucial to feminist responses to our contemporary challenges. Part 1, Nature in Buber's Dialogical Philosophy. All of us, I presume, here in this room are aware that we are living through a massive ecological crisis brought about by modern technoscience, industrialization, and technologization of all aspects of life, including the human body. So successful has humanity been in its effort to understand nature by means of science and master it by means of technology, that in 2000 scientists have declared the dawn of the Anthropocene, that is, the age of humans. The term denotes the degree to which humans have impacted all ecosystems, so we can no longer differentiate between humanity and nature. But the debate still rages concerning the causes, the temporal scope, and the role of technology in the Anthropocene. I'm not going to get into it. I've written a lot about it, and we don't have time for it right now. So be this as it may, we are compelled to think deeply and carefully about the relationship between humanity, nature, and technology. Buber's dialogical philosophy charts for us the right path to address the challenges of the Anthropocene. Buber, many of you here know, extended dialogue beyond the human sphere to relations with non-human beings, be they plants, animals, and even rocks. In the famous passage from I and Thou, Buber considered the tree and illustrated the difference between treating the tree as an it, an object, or as a thou, a subject. The I-it relations is monological, based on reducing the object to the quality that may be noticed thanks to ready-made categories. In I-it relations with nature, natural entities are reduced to their utilitarian value as a resource to be used by humans for their own benefits, such as shelter, food, or energy. In contrast, in I-thou relations with the tree or other natural entities, that kind of relationship stems from openness to and the will to preserve the otherness of nature, affirming its presence and its inherent worth. In I-thou relations with nature, natural entities are treated as subjects, they are allowed to be themselves, and they are recognized as actual beings whose essence doesn't depend on the human point of view, interest, or desire. But how can human beings enter a dialogue with nature if nature is always silent, and if nature doesn't understand human speech? How can nature place nonverbal claims on us? The Husserl philosopher Erazim Kohak was the first to answer the question. by using Buber's dialogical philosophy. This goes back to 1968 essay. He stated that in dialogues, I'm quoting now, things initially present themselves in immediate experience, not as objects, but as fellow beings, capable of functioning both as it and as thou. Following Kohat, the ecophenomenologist Scott Friskis argued, quote, that things speak, but we are not good at listening, unquote. Nature's speech has been lost, drowned out by the human-built world, but it is our ethical obligation to enter a dialogue with nature. In such dialogue, according to Friskis, and again I quote, we give our full attention to the address of the beings and things we meet, engage them as self-speaking presences, and respond to their claims wholeheartedly and without reserve, unquote. So recognizing the role of interpretation in human relations with the environment has given rise to what we call environmental hermeneutics, which is a distinct strand within the environmental humanities, strand that is most indebted to Buber. According to environmental hermeneuticists, Buber taught us how to truly listen by being present to the other, by responding to the other as a whole person, and by creating a space in which the other can speak his or her own words and meanings, or sometimes even without words. If we learn to listen to the voices of nature, be it the singing of birds, the sonorous music of whales, and even the silent language of inanimate natural entities, we hear their moral plea. Let me be. Do not destroy me. Respect my right to exist. All of which evoke our environmental response by caring for nature, protecting it from damage and abuse by technological means. With a tree, a horse, and even a rock, there is some reciprocity and mutuality, even though complete mutuality is impossible because these natural entities are either pre or at the threshold of language. That point was mentioned, I think, by Sylvia in the earlier lecture. Buber's insightfully understood that the future of nature and the future of humanity depend on human ability to encounter nature as a moral subject to which we must respond. Women, and especially the feminists among them, were most attuned to Buber's message. Let me now turn to the second section of my comments to explain how Buber's philosophy impacted three distinct but related feminist discourses: ecofeminism, feminist ethics of care, and feminist eco-theology, all of which highlighted the intersection of technology, ecology, and women. Part 2, relationality, ecofeminism, and feminist ethics of care. So ecofeminists endorsed Buber's ontology of relations, or ontological primacy of relationality. Ecological feminists or ecofeminists are the feminist theorists who recognize that nature is a feminist issue. Emerging in the 1970s as internal critique within the male-dominated environmental movement, ecofeminists exposed the link between the human domination of nature and the domination of women by men, both of which are unjust. Ecofeminism stands for two main claims. One, the empirical claim that is in most part of the world, ecological stresses disproportionately affect women. And the second claim, the theoretical claim that women and nature are connected historically through conceptual symbolic association. In Western society, a binary hierarchical dualism has governed the perception of the sexes. Women are identified with non-human nature, with physical, embodied materiality, and with the emotions, whereas men were associated with rationality, reason, mind, and a disembodied spirituality. Since in these binary dichotomies, the latter was privileges over the former, in Western culture, women were subordinate to and dominated by men. Ecofeminists have critiqued the logic of domination that ungirded both the male domination of females, that's androcentrism, and human domination of nature, that's anthropocentrism. But how does technology fit in? How does it relate to ecofeminism? Carolyn Merchant, the historian of science, answered the question by showing that the emergence of modern technoscience in the 17th century reconceptualized reality as a machine, rather than as a living organism. And this shift sanctioned the domination of both nature and women. She demonstrated that pre-modern Europeans viewed the cosmos as a living organism and considered the earth to be a beneficent, receptive, nurturing female. Therefore, in the pre-modern world, Mother Earth was believed to be endowed with reproductive and nurturing capacities. And the image of the earth as living organism and nurturing mother served as a cultural constraint, restricting the action of human beings. All that is Carolyn Merchant. According to her, as long as the earth was conceptualized as alive and sensitive, it could be considered a breach of human ethical behavior to carry out destructive acts against it. So modern science disrupted the pre-modern organic framework, replacing it with mechanical philosophy of experimental science. Instead of being viewed as organism, nature was now perceived as a machine, dead, inert, and insensitive to human action. So the modern technoscience regarded its task as uncovering the mysteries of nature, characteristically imaged as female. And since nature is no more than a system of inert particles, human exploitation of nature was deemed morally just. Within 3 centuries, modern technoscience has achieved the remarkable understanding of the workings of nature and the control of the forces of nature. But these achievements came with a heavy price: the immense devastation of natural ecosystems that has rendered life on Earth more precarious and uncertain. So ecofeminists did not merely expose the profound injustice it inflicted on both nature and women, but also they articulated an ethical theory that responded to the domination of women by men. Women by men, and the human devastation of the earth. I refer to feminist ethics of care, which moved beyond criticism to reconstruction of alternative ethics. Pioneered in the early 1980s by Carol Gilligan, a Jewish woman whose Jewishness goes unrecognized often, the feminist ethics of care replaced the traditional focus on justice, abstract rationality, rights, and individual autonomy, with the emphasis on human situatedness, subjectivity, emotions, and above all, the focus on care. For feminist ethicists of care, the self is relational, interdependent, vulnerable, and concerned with the well-being of others, precisely as Buber understood the human condition. I'm going to give you one example of an ethicist of care. I refer to Neil Noddings, a leading feminist ethicist of care, who illustrates the indebtedness of feminist ethics of care to Buber, as well as the connection between the ethics of care and environmentalism. In her influential work, Caring, a Relational Approach to Ethics and Moral Education, that's 1984, Noddings repeatedly cited Buber as she reflected on the dynamics of caring relations. If Buber stated that love is the responsibility of an eye for a thou, Noddings noted that, quote, caring too, although it is not necessarily accompanied by love, is partly the responsibility of the other for the cared for, unquote. Against critics who charge that feminist ethics of care is insufficiently social or political, Noddings stated that a caring perspective can yield social policies that establish conditions in which caring can flourish. The care perspective offers a healthy context for personal and communal caring, yet another aspect of Buber's social philosophy. While Noddings is not considered an ecofeminist, she's not known as an environmental ethicist, nonetheless, she spelled out the environmental implications of the feminist ethics of care. In a chapter entitled, quote, Caring for Animals, Plants, Things, and Ideas, Noddings addressed the emerging animal rights movement, rejecting Peter Singer's utilitarian arguments in favor of animal liberation. When she extended ethics of care to animals and to plants, she did not cite Buber, famous passages, but she referred to her own domestic pets in a way that echoes Buber's encounter with non-human entities. She talks about the thou may feel the firmament, and that's definitely a reference to one of the lines whether it translates firmament or heavens, but it's obviously a reference to Buber. In her later publication, The Challenge to Care in Schools, an Alternative Approach to Education, this is from 2005, Nordin showed caring for the environment more explicitly. And she stated, our lives are interdependent with those of non-human animals and plants. Most importantly, she showed how caring for animals, plants, and the soil should be taught in schools. Like Buber's dialogical philosophy, Nordin's feminist ethics of care was intended as a guide to life to be implemented through education. A similar approach was taken by Virginia Held. I'm not going to talk about her, but she's a very influential ethicist of care who extended relational philosophy to nature. Part 3. I'm now going to shift and talk about two theologians who give us an example of how eco-theologians read Buber. So the full integration of Buberian dialogical philosophy, feminist ethics of care, and ecofeminism was offered by religious ecofeminists who framed earth care in terms of creation care, based on the biblical creation narrative. I'm going to illustrate it, as I said, by looking at Sally McFaig. She died in 2019, and Judith Plaskow, who was born 1946. Sally McFaig is a Buberian theologian of embodiment. Sally McFaig took the ecological crisis she took it on very early, already in the mid-1970s. She argued that Christianity must undergo a paradigm shift to properly address it by being attentive to contemporary science. She sought to reinterpret the Christian sacred narrative in the context of what she calls new creation story, and she endorsed the findings of contemporary science, especially in the fields of astrophysics, evolutionary biology, and ecology. In her path-breaking book, The Body of God, McFaig presented an organic model for the place of the human in the universe, which rejected the binary hierarchical dualism of modern mechanistic philosophy. Contrary to the denigration of embodiment, in traditional Christian theology, McFaig promoted what she called Christian embodiment theology. That theology sacralizes space, place, body, physicality, and materiality. The body, she claimed, is the mode for ecological theology because, and I'm quoting, we are bodies among the bodies of other life forms on earth, and that all together we form one body, the body of the earth, which is against but one of the bodies in the greater universe, unquote. The very physicality and materiality of creation manifested the glory of God, calling humans to appreciate animate and inanimate beings that manifest the physicality of divine immanence. That's according to McFaig. In so doing, McFaig radicalized the doctrine of incarnation. Jesus of Nazareth is not the only embodied presence of God on earth. The universe itself is the body of God. Now, to call the earth the body of God is to speak metaphorically. And appropriately, McFaig began her theological career by analyzing the metaphorical nature of religious language. She argued that all language that seeks to express relationship between God and the world is necessarily metaphorical. We create pictures of reality, what she calls models, that use metaphors to express human values, norms, ideals. A model is, in her language, a metaphor that has gained sufficient stability and scope so as to present pattern for relatively comprehensive, coherent explanation, unquote. Models order the images of a tradition so that they may become intelligible patterns for life. So McFaig rejected speaking about God as king, God as judge, God as shepherd. She promotes instead talking about God as mother, God as friend, God as lover. These models can more adequately address our ecological challenges because they frame relations between God and the world not as subject-object, that's I-it, but rather subject-subjects relations, namely I-thou. Taking her cue from the feminist Marilyn Frye, McFaig conjured two metaphors, the arrogant I and the loving I, to explore the difference between I-it and I-thou relations, respectively. The arrogant I objectifies nature as a separate, inferior, and usable resource for the benefit of humans. She avers that, quote, the arrogant I is the colonial, imperialistic, patriarchal I that simplifies and controls the other, poor people and nature become human resources or natural resources, unquote. The arrogant I doesn't respect natural entities and doesn't grasp human relatedness to an interdependence on animals and plants. It only seeks to exploit the natural world. In contrast, the loving eye is the metaphor for subject-subject relations, in which the gaze consists of appreciation for the otherness, the subjecthood of each and every bit of creation. That's a quote from her. The loving eye extends Haifa relations beyond the human sphere to the physical world that constitutes a moral subject. The loving eye is what God saw at creation when he declared it good and even very good. When we look at mountains, rivers, animals, and plants as subjects, albeit different kinds of subject from human beings, we can appreciate their own intrinsic value and that demand respect in and for itself. In her Supernatural Christians, that's a book from 1997, her indebtedness to Buber was even more explicit, and she makes it very clear that Buber's subject-subject model deserves attention because it is close to the one that seems appropriate to supernatural Christians. I want to be sure that I'm not going beyond my time limit, so I'm okay?
About 2 minutes.
2 minutes, all right. So if that's the case, basically she's talking about, I won't get into her theory of cosmic Christ, but she's really perhaps one of the most original ecofeminist theologians that all of us who care about the natural world should look at her work. Now let me go quickly to Judith Plaskow, a Jewish theologian or eco-theologian who was very influenced by McFay, as well as by other Christian ecofeminist theologians such as Rosemary Ruther, passed away not too long ago, and Carol P. Christ also passed away not too long ago. Plaskow is the most influential Jewish ecofeminist theologian, and she referred to feminism as a kind of conversion that she had when she went to Yale Divinity School, and she had to make a decision: am I going to be a feminist? Am I going to be Jew? And she decides to be both. Of course, she wants to be a Jewish feminist and a feminist Jew by writing systematic Jewish feminist theology. Nice music here.
Ecological.
So what's interesting about her is that she speaks directly about the devastation of the earth, and I'll just give you one statement from a famous book, Standing Again at Sinai, 1991 book, when she says, the devastation of the earth and the ugliness and suffering in society are the direct outcome of our devaluation of human embodiment, especially the bodies of women. So what she's going to do in her theology, and she calls it it's a theology of sexuality. That's how she refers to it. It's not just embodiment, it's about sexuality. And what she wants to do is to free all sexual expressions from all sorts of binary or simplistic or unjust kind of categorization, and instead to appreciate the erotic aspect of human life and to see the erotic as spiritual. So in her Buberian theology, sexuality, all forms of sexuality are relations. In all forms of sexuality, relations that are based on control, domination, and hierarchy are rejected. Whereas diversity, choice, plurality of sexual expression, that's honor. So she's moving in a very similar way to what McFay did. I want to be sure that I stand within the limit of my time. So just to tell you,
we've exceeded now.
Yeah, Plaskow, I'm nearly done. Plaskow's egalitarian, communal, embodied, and ecological vision of Judaism links the lives of women to the fate of the earth and the pursuit of justice. She links them to each other, and she urges us to act responsibly and responsively in history and in our community. And if you want two examples of Jewish ecological activists or environmental activists who followed Plaskow's Buberian understanding, you have to look at Ellen Bernstein, a major environmentalist in the United States, or Einat Kramer here in Israel. Ellen Bernstein is the creator of Shomrei Adama, the first environmental organization. Einat Kramer is the leader of a wonderful ecological initiative here called Teva Ivri, and what you will see is how much they use Buber in their self-justification. So I'll just give you one line from Ellen Bernstein. She talks about how, in the language of Martin Buber, deep seeing means I-thou relationship with nature rather than I-it one, and it means approaching nature as a friend. Einat Kramer, who's done a lot to revive the whole concept of Shmita in Israeli life, she talks about how dialogue with nature, and I'm quoting, is a gateway to an encounter with the Creator who continues to speak to us through nature. So here's an example how two environmental activists speak Buberian language. In conclusion, Buber understood the environmental implication of modern technology long before the ecological crisis was fully understood and before human life, including the human body, became technologized by converging technologies. This essay highlights Buber's impact on environmental ethics, ecophenomenology, feminist ethics of care, ecofeminism, and ecotheology. These are discourses that have been critical of modern technology because it brought about massive eco-crisis that threatens the future of life on Earth. Recently, philosophers of technology have extended Buber's dialogical philosophy to the interface between humans and machine. That's a topic we talked about, but I've argued in many places against this move because the people who promote AI technology and the ideology that justifies their work, that's transhumanism, seek to transcend embodiment, to transcend physicality, to transcend the materiality of life. And their ultimate goal is to make biological humans obsolete. So I critique transhumanism, and my critique is inspired by ecofeminism, feminist ethics of care, and feminist ecotheology, all of which cohere with Buber's dialogical philosophy. Thank you.